Welcome to Unravelling Revelation, episode 13. Hello, I'm Bruce Telfer, and in our past episodes, we have been looking at the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. And we have identified these two powers as being the Roman Catholic Church and the United States of America, as represented by the gentleman in this picture. But relations between America and the Vatican and the Catholic Church in general have never been as cordial as represented in this picture. So what I propose to do now is to look into Vatican US relations beginning in the past and bringing it up to the future, because this is the only right and reasonable thing to do. If we have established correctly the interpretation of Bible prophecy, that one power is Vatican or the Catholic Church and the other is the US, then we should be able to see in history and in contemporary times the relationship developing, because the prophecy says that they will work together to bring forth the power of the Vatican and the mark of the beast. So what I propose to do is first look at some history of the relations between Vatican and the US, and we will come down to contemporary times, and we will continue with contemporary events in a next episode. So what I want to do now is begin with the history of the US Republic as it interacts with the papacy and the Catholic Church in general. And we're going to begin by going to Independence Hall, where the founders of the US Republic were sorting out their political affairs and organizing their constitution. Now, when proceedings were concluded in Independence Hall and the delegates were leaving, one of them, Benjamin Franklin, walked outside, and this is what happened. Outside Independence Hall, when the Constitutional Convention of 1787 ended, Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia asked Benjamin Franklin, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" With no hesitation whatsoever, Franklin responded, "A republic, if you can keep it." So these people, the founding fathers and the Americans in general, knew that if they established a republic, it was going to be in danger of being overthrown. Certainly Benjamin Franklin was aware. And there's very good and valid reasons for this, because this was a government which had seldom ever been seen in the world before. It's based on Protestantism and republicanism. That's not the Republican Party. It is on the principle of republicanism, because that's what America is. It's not a democracy, it's a republic. And under the Constitution, Benjamin Franklin, no, sorry, I mean, Abraham Lincoln, he, in a well-known speech, the Gettysburg Address after the Battle of Gettysburg, he said that this battle was fought so that government of the people, by the people, and for the people should not disappear off the face of the earth. This was a republic which was very different from everything else that had come before. One politician The Honorable J.A. Bingham put it this way: what the world had not seen for ages, a church without a pope and a state without a king. Now, do you think the popes of the world and the kings of the world were happy with a government that excluded them? Not at all. But by the year 1987, on the Constitution's bicentennial, Time magazine calculated that of the 170 countries that exist today, more than 160 have written charters modeled directly or indirectly on the US version. So the rest of the world was quite happy to model their own political systems on the constitutional United States. But of course, there are many others who were not happy at all, and we need to look into this. The Vatican condemned the Declaration of Independence as wickedness and called the Constitution of the United States a satanic document. So here you have two systems diametrically opposed to one another. In the opinion of the Independent newspaper of New York in 1913, they said, "Our form of government is one based wholly on the will of the people. The state is free from all control of the churches. All these principles have been formally condemned by Rome." So, two systems in direct opposition to one another. And so a war has begun. According to General Lafayette, who was a French general who fought for the independence of America from the British, he says, "If the liberties of the American people are ever destroyed, they will fall by the hands of the Romish clergy." Many people back then were well aware of the animosity expressed by the Catholic Church towards the new republic established in America, which was opposed to the principles of Catholicism. So, what did they do? Well, at the Congress of Vienna, which was convened after the Napoleonic Wars, the heads of state, which were all monarchists, they got together. They had just put down the French Revolution. And they were not happy with that because the French Revolution tended to cut the heads off these gentlemen and others. So they were extremely interested in preventing such things ever happening again. And this is what they did. The sovereigns of the Holy Alliance had massed large armies and soon entered into a pledge to devote them to the suppression of all uprisings of the people in favor of free government. The ones who were in favor of free government had to be suppressed and put down. And he, Pope Pius VII, desired to devote the Jesuits, supported by his pontifical power, to the accomplishments of that end. So the Jesuits, which are the sword of the Catholic Church, that's how they've been described. Napoleon described them not as a religious order, but as a military order. They just functioned differently from normal militaries. They have been often described as the sword of the Catholic Church, and they have been given the task of preventing America from prospering and hopefully to destroy it completely. Here we have Georgetown University in America, in Washington, D.C. It is a Jesuit university, and it's just a small indication of the power that the Jesuits had already at the very founding of the American Republic. The man who founded this university was John Carroll, who was a Jesuit, and he was the first Roman Catholic bishop in 1789. And he also, believe it or not, his family, the Carroll family, donated the land, the whole parcel of land that forms Washington, D.C. today. Yes, believe it or not, Washington, D.C. is built on land which was donated by the Jesuits to the American Republic. Quite a strange occurrence, but it shows you that the influence of the Jesuits was already in America at the very founding of America. This is a comment on the Jesuit Georgetown University from the Jesuit Enigma, written by an ex-Catholic priest. An interesting proof of Jesuit prestige and power in this country is the existence in the shadow of the capital of Washington of the Jesuit School for Foreign Service, opened a few years ago through the instrumentality of an Irish American, Father Edmund Walsh, S.J., meaning Society of Jesus, meaning Jesuits. So in this university was established a special school for foreign service where all budding and people who wanted to work for the government as officials needed to go to be instructed on how to be a good American official, instructed by the Jesuits. At this school of diplomatic service, said to be the largest of its kind in America and the most popular, young Americans are trained to guide the future fortunes of the Republic. There is no small irony in this situation. It is quite within the power of the general, meaning the general of the Jesuit order, to dictate the principles and theories to be taught by the Jesuits at Washington. One cannot forget the words of the Pope Clement XIV, who accused them of rising up against the very kings who admitted them into their countries. The Jesuits have a terrible history. They've been expelled from 80 plus countries around the world for subterfuge, for murder, for assassinations, for intrigue, for revolutions. Yes, they also encourage revolutions when it's in their interest. So they have a history of intervening in politics all over the world, but especially in Catholic countries. And Catholic countries have always had a big problem with the Jesuits. So that's why they were eventually abolished by the church itself. But after the French Revolution, they were reinstated because the powers that be needed them back in force to perform the duties of destroying people who want to live free, to govern themselves, and the Jesuits were given that task. So we need to look into how this interacts with America. Well, Samuel Morse, he spent a lot of time in Rome. This is the same man who invented the Morse code. And you can see this book on the right here is the book he wrote about his experiences in Rome and what he found out there. And this is what he wrote. The Jesuits are a secret society, a sort of Masonic order with super added features of revolting odiousness and 1,000 times more dangerous. And Abraham Lincoln, was spoken to by Morse, and this is his comment. I would have laughed at the man who told me that before I became president, but Professor Morse has opened my eyes on that subject, and we're going to look into more of the interaction with Lincoln and the Jesuits shortly. As a result of the intervention of the old powers in Europe with their Vienna Congress and their appointing the Jesuits to intercede on their behalf and work for their interests, the United States in 1826 passed the Monroe Doctrine, named after the president at that time. And basically, the Monroe Doctrine said, you stay over there and we will stay over here. And if you come over here and intervene in our business, it will mean war. So basically, what America is saying to the European powers is, if you come and intervene in the Western Hemisphere, you will be at war with us. Of course, the West, the old powers in Europe, the aristocracies and the ones who were building empires, were not impressed with that at all, and they certainly did not obey. Here is a classic example of British intervention in America in 1814 when they invaded and they burnt down the White House in Washington, D.C. So they certainly were not prepared to obey or look or be impressed by America's Monroe Doctrine, and they intervened all the time. So what we have to do now is go down to the time of the American Civil War. So this is one of the times that the European powers intervened in American affairs, and they tried to assist the Confederates against the Union. So the, the whole object of the Civil War was to divide America into two, a southern part and a northern part, where they would basically have slavery in the south and non-slavery in the north, and it was going to create a lot of agitation. And they're basically two separate countries, which would end up hating one another, and they could be controlled by pitting one another against each other, and the European powers could manipulate the whole thing to their advantage. So this is what the object of the Civil War was: to break America in two. Now, I need to introduce you to a man called Charles Chiniquy. He was a Roman Catholic priest for 50 years in the Church of Rome. And he wrote a book called The 50 Years in the Church of Rome. And he was a very intimate acquaintance with Abraham Lincoln. It's a very interesting story. Charles Chiniquy was a Roman Catholic priest, and he got offside with the Jesuits. The Jesuits wanted to destroy him, so they created a fraud against him and took him to court, claimed that he was an evil man, and it was all fabricated by the Jesuits, which is something they do on a regular basis. So Charles Chiniquy needed a lawyer, so he got a lawyer called Abraham Lincoln. And this was before Abraham Lincoln, of course, was president. And Abraham Lincoln was able to prove that all the charges against Charles Chiniquy were a forgery, which absolutely infuriated the Jesuits. So they hate Charles Chiniquy and they hate Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln becomes president. So this is where fight begins. And it's going to be a bloody and terrible, nasty fight in which America basically loses. So what we're going to look at now is a statement from Charles Chiniquy in his book. Because modern Protestants have not only forgotten what Rome was, what she is, and what she will forever be, the most irreconcilable and powerful enemy of the gospel of Christ, but they consider her almost as a branch of the church whose cornerstone is Christ. See, things are changing. Protestants used to know exactly what the Catholic Church was all about. You know, the Protestants initially, they disagreed about many things, but one thing they all agreed about originally was that Rome was the woman riding the beast. Now, Protestants in general have totally lost that knowledge, and they don't believe it anymore. And this is what he's pointing out here. So, Charles Chiniquy often went to visit Lincoln when he was president, and they discussed many things together. And so in his book, Charles Chiniquy is quoting Lincoln extensively. And this is one of the things, many of the things that we're going to read now is Lincoln talking to Charles Chiniquy and Charles Chiniquy writing it down in his book. We owe it to Popery. This is Lincoln speaking. We owe it to Popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of her noblest sons. I pity the priests when the people realize that they are responsible for the bloodshed in this war. I feel more and more every day that it is not against the Americans of the South alone that I am fighting. It is more against the Pope of Rome, his Jesuits, and their slaves. There are only very few of the Southern leaders who are not more or less under the influence of the Jesuits through their wives, family relations, and their friends. Several members of the family of Jeff Davis is the president of the Confederacy in the South, are under the influence of the Jesuits. Even the Protestant ministers are under the influence of the Jesuits without suspecting it. This is Lincoln speaking. Rome is doing here what she has done in Mexico and all the South American republics. She is paralyzing by civil war. She divides our nation in order to weaken, subdue, and rule it. So Lincoln is well aware of what the Catholic Church is trying to achieve by means of the Civil War. It would become merciless, as all religious wars are. It would become a war of extermination on both sides. What Lincoln is saying here is he doesn't want this evidence to be shown to the American people. He's afraid of the war being exacerbated to include a religious element where the Protestants would attack the Catholics, and of course the Catholics would attack back. So he's actually saying, I don't want this evidence of Roman Catholicism intervening to be known, at least not yet, because it would cause such consternation, and the whole purpose of fighting the war would be diverted into a religious war. Lincoln was almost obsessed with simply preserving the Union. That's what his goal was. It wasn't to free the slaves. We'll talk about that in a moment. But his obsession was to preserve the Union. He didn't want anything to detract from that mission that he felt he had. Okay, carrying on. The Protestants of both the North and the South would surely unite to exterminate the priests and the Jesuits if they could hear what Professor Morse has said to me of the plots made in the very city of Rome to destroy this republic. So you see, two systems diametrically opposed, one trying to destroy the other. Our people are not ready to learn and believe these things. He's talking about suppressing the truth about this. And perhaps this is not the proper time to initiate them into the dark mysteries of hell. Sooner or later, the nation will know, and those who have caused those desolations and disasters will be called to give an account. Well, Lincoln was wrong about that. They never found out. And there's a reason for that, which we will come to. So, what were the European powers up to? What were their plans to intervene on the side of the papacy and in the side of their own interests? Well, a convention between Great Britain, France, and Spain for joint intervention in Mexico was signed in London. Well, why Mexico? Well, here we go. France invaded Mexico in 1861, and the whole purpose was to take over the country so that France could then invade America and support the Confederacy from the south. Britain already had armies stationed in Canada, and they were going to invade from the north. Well, some people began to suspect that the Pope was supporting the South. And he wrote a letter to Jefferson Davis, which was made public, and everybody knew it's not a direct endorsement, but it's an indirect endorsement of the South and the goals of the South. So what happened after it became relatively well known, at least in Catholic circles, that the Pope was supporting the South? This is what happened to the Catholics in the North. During the American Civil War, Pope Pope Pius IX addressed a letter to Jefferson Davis, the rebel leader, as illustrious president, hence openly showing his support for the Southern rebels. 104,000 loyal Roman Catholics from the Northern Army switched sides and fought for the South. So now it's becoming more of a religious war than ever before, but it's not publicly known. Jefferson Davis was really a secret Catholic. Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy, was an aspiring Catholic and was sympathetic to the Catholic cause. He was known to wear Catholic sacramentals, a Saint Benedict medal, a miraculous medal, and a French scapular, as well as a brown scapular. I'll show you what they look like in a minute. Despite the United States as a whole not being friendly to Catholicism, North and South, about 20 Confederate generals in his cabinet were also known to be practicing Catholics, and every Catholic bishop in the South supported the Confederacy. This is a scapular. This is what Jeff Davis used to wear, indicating that he was a sympathetic Catholic, or at least aspiring to be a Catholic. He was also, hang on, Lincoln had to play his strongest card. He only had, he had two cards left to play, because he knew what the scheme was. He knew that the French were going to invade from the south, the British from the north. So what did he do? He played the slavery card. He abolished slavery January 1st, 1893. Lincoln never intended to abolish slavery during the war. He wanted to abolish it after the war. He thought that abolishing slavery during the war was only going to exacerbate and enrage the Southern slave owners more than they were already enraged, and to fight even more earnestly. But he was forced to do it for the reason that the European powers were going to intervene. When he abolished slavery, they could no longer intervene, because this is a statement from the Encyclopedia Britannica, which sheds immense light. The locking up of the world's source of cotton supply had been a general calamity, and the Confederate calamity for the European powers, because they depended on it for their industrial revolution. You may remember reading about all the cotton mills in Liverpool and Manchester and places like that. Anyway, and the Confederate government and people had steadily expected that the British and French governments would intervene in the war. The conversion of the struggle into a crusade against slavery made intervention impossible. And the reason for that is because the British Empire had recently just abolished slavery, and they had abolished slavery under public pressure, especially from Christians. And France had followed suit eventually. So intervening militarily on behalf of a slave-owning government was impossible. It was totally politically incorrect for the times. And this really threw a spanner into the European powers' plans. But Lincoln had another card to play. And what he did was he appealed to Tsar Alexander II of Russia to intervene and on his behalf. And so what the Russians did was they sent their navy to New York and San Francisco, and basically they said, if you England and France intervene, we will be at war with you, and my ships are there to blow your ships out of the water if they try. So Russia became very popular with the Americans, and here is a poem which was written in their honor, and they had balls in their honor, festivities celebrating the Russians' arrival. Unbelievable. Yeah, Russia saved America. So this is a poem from Oliver Wendell Holmes, and he says, bleak are our shores with the blasts of December. Fettered and chill is the rivulet's flow. Thrilling and warm are the hearts that remember. Who was our friend when the world was our foe? Russia was our friend. Fires of the north in eternal communion, blend your broad flashes with evening's bright star. God bless the empire, that's Russia, that loves the great union, strength to her people, long life to the Tsar. The Tsar actually liked America. He liked the American economic system and he wanted to duplicate it. And he had Americans working in his country building railways, just like the Americans had built their railway from east coast to west coast. They were in Russia building the Siberian railway for the Tsar. However, as you all know, things did not turn out well for Lincoln. So one of the statements that Shinnecoy makes in his book is, I come fearlessly today before the American people to say and prove that the President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by the priests and Jesuits of Rome. What happened was they congregated together in a particular part of Washington, D.C., and planned to assassinate him. But Lincoln knew that there were always plans to assassinate him. They had tried several times in the past. And this is one of his things he said to Shinnecoy when Shinnecoy came to visit. I am so glad to see you again, he said. You see that your friends, the Jesuits, have not yet killed me, but they would have surely done it when I passed through their most devoted city, Baltimore, had I not defeated their plans by passing incognito a few hours before they expected me. So many plots have already been made against my life that it is a real miracle that they have all failed. When we consider that the great majority of them were in the hands of skillful Roman Catholic murderers, evidently trained by Jesuits. Yeah, this is Lincoln talking. But can we expect that God will make a perpetual miracle to save my life? I believe not. The Jesuits are so expert in those deeds of blood that Henry IV said that it was impossible to escape them. That he was the King of France who was also assassinated by the Jesuits. And he became their victim, though he did all he could to protect himself. My escape from their hands since the letter of the Pope to Jeff Davis has sharpened 1,000,000 daggers to pierce my breast would be more than a miracle. So Lincoln was very perceptive, and he knew that he was a target, and they would certainly try many times until they succeeded. He said, new projects of assassination are detected almost every day, accompanied with such savage circumstances that they bring to my memory the massacre of the St. Bartholomew and the gunpowder plot. We feel at their investigation that they come from the same masters in the art of murder, the Jesuits. Well, as you probably know, this man on the right here was the instrument of pulling the trigger that killed Lincoln. But he had a whole bunch of co-conspirators, and they met at the house of Surratt, Mary Surratt. And in that house was a whole bunch of Catholic priests, Jesuit priests, all plotting the assassination. And many of them were eventually paying for their crimes by execution. But one of them escaped. His name is John Surratt. He escaped first to Canada, then to England, and eventually he ended up in the Vatican. And he was a member of the papal military, which the Pope used to have. He used to control a very large section of Italy, the Papal States, and John Surratt was one of his soldiers. He eventually came back to America and he was tried and he was found innocent. Shinnecoy carries on to describe what happened after the assassination. The fatal mistake of the American government in the prosecution of the assassins of Abraham Lincoln was to constantly keep out of sight the religious element of that terrible drama. Nothing would have been more easy than to find out the complicity of the priests who were not only coming every week and every day, but who were even living in that den of murderers. But this was carefully avoided from the beginning to the end of the trial. When not long after the execution of the murderers, I went incognito to Washington to begin my investigation about its true and real authors, I was not a little surprised to see that not a single one of the government men to whom I addressed myself would consent to have any talk with me on the matter, except after I had given my word to honor that I would never mention their names in connection with the result of my investigation. I saw with a profound distress that the influence of Rome was almost supreme in Washington. I could not find a single statesman who would dare to face the nefarious influence and fight it down. So that's the conclusion that Shinakwe came to, that America was basically taken over already back in his day by the Jesuits. But one thing transpired, and that was that America broke off diplomatic relations with the Vatican in 1867. Some people had enough courage to realize that there has to be some payback for the Catholic and Jesuit involvement in the Civil War and especially in the assassination of Lincoln. So they broke off relations, and that persisted for quite a while until we have this rather enigmatic statement in the prophecy that this beast from the earth, which is America, had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. So what we are told here is that America joins the other side. Now, we could ask the question, when did America start speaking like a dragon? When did America join the satanic side? Well, that's a very leading question, and many people have many different opinions about that. But let me just try and illustrate. If you were to ask a Native American when America started speaking like a dragon and was committing evil actions, what do you think they would say? What do you think a Filipino would say? If a Filipino actually knew his history, and when they were fighting the Spanish for their independence, America came, let us help you, and they took over the country and they killed 500,000 Filipinos in a war, and quite brutally too. So in other words, the Filipinos simply swapped one colonial master for another. What do you think people in Vietnam would say if you said, when did America start speaking like a beast, like a dragon? What do you think people in Syria would say, or Libya maybe, or Iraq? So what I'm trying to say is that it's a very subjective thing. People have many different opinions about whether America is speaking like a dragon or not. Of course, America claims to be speaking like a humanitarian democratic republic, but many people in the rest of the world would dispute that. So all I'm saying is that we can have our own opinions, but if we're going to be totally objective, I would like to suggest that America started speaking like a dragon around about this time here, during the Cold War. You see, the Cold War changed things immensely, and America was looking for allies against the threat, the communist threat. The communists were threatening to take over the war. America was standing in the way, and America was looking for allies wherever they could find them. So America realized, of course, that the Catholic Church was not happy with communism. So possibly they could enlist the Vatican as an ally. On October the 20th, 1951, President Truman nominated former General Mark W. Clark to be the United States emissary to the Holy See, that's the Vatican. Clark later withdrew his nomination on January 13, 1952, following protests from Senator Tom Connolly and Protestant groups. So back in the 1950s, America was already wanting to normalize relations with the Vatican, to enlist the Vatican in their fight against communism, which the Vatican was not against at all. But Protestants in America still had a knowledge of what the Vatican and the Catholic Church was all about, and they rose up and protested about it. So it didn't happen. However, it didn't take long before that opposition to melt away. And in 1984, the United States and the Holy See announced the establishment of diplomatic relations. The Senate confirmed William A. Wilson as the first U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. Ambassador Wilson had been President Reagan's personal envoy to the Pope since 1981, but now that was informal. Now it's become formal. The Holy See, that's the political arm of the Catholic Church. The Holy See named Archbishop Pio Laghi as the first apostolic nuncio, that means ambassador, of the Holy See to the US. So now Protestants do not object. Nobody objects. And this is a result of the Cold War. People are more concerned about about communism than they are about Catholicism. It was a historical event when the Senate on September 22, 1983, voted to repeal the 1876 ban on diplomatic relations with the Vatican, thus opening the way for President Reagan to appoint William A. Wilson as the first ambassador, not to the state of Vatican City, re-established in 1929, but to the Holy See itself. This new relationship is significant not only in itself, but also as an indication of a shift in the ideology and public opinion and policy, especially in the area of the American doctrine of separation of church and state. Notice what he says here. This is a comment from a man who wrote a book called Papal Supremacy and American Doctrine. He says, this is an indication of a shift in ideology and public opinion. So this is an enormous shift, actually, from opposition back in the 1950s, and just 30 years later, we have this change in attitude and public opinion and ideology to firstly to exclude the Catholic Church from diplomatic relations with America, but now to involve them and restore normal relations. So what this means is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. This is an Arabic aphorism or slogan, or it comes from the Arab people, and what it's saying is if you have a common enemy, if two have a common enemy, then those two become friends. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And this is what has developed as a result of the Cold War, of the confrontation between capitalism and communism, and Catholicism and communism. So Catholicism and capitalism are now friends, shaking hands and working together. And surely, surely, this must be when America speaks like a dragon, because it's not only working on behalf of itself, it's working on behalf of the Catholic Church. And the two working together are organizing the world to benefit them both. They have common interests now. So, what I'm going to do in the next episode is to look into how this relationship has developed, how this relationship has progressed, and where we are in the scheme of things with the relationship between the Catholic Church and America. Now, I want to reiterate again that this is essential to understand. If we're going to understand prophecy properly, we need to look into if where prophecy is being fulfilled. I have presented the case for that America is the beast from the land, and Catholic Church is the beast from the sea, and that America will work on behalf of restoring the wound that repairing the breach, repairing the wound, repairing, bringing the Catholic Church back to supremacy in the world. That's what the prophecy is telling us. What we have to look at is this actually happening? It can be disturbing for some people, obviously, to talk about these things. It's politically incorrect to be anti-Catholic, and that's because the Catholic Church is being looked upon more favorably now in the world, especially by Protestants. We have the ecumenical movement going full blast with all the religious leaders of the world assembling under the auspices of the Pope. He's created this kind of umbrella that everybody of religious impulse can comfortably come under, and he will be their father, and this is where it's all going. So it's not politically correct to be anti-Catholic anymore, because the Pope is such a peace lover, and he's working for the peace of the world, and working for the interests of the world, working for the poor people of the world, and condemning all the oppressors. And he seems like a lovely person. But he's presented as such, as the man of peace. But it actually says in Scripture that by peace he will deceive many. It's in the book of Daniel. So this needs to be looked into and see if this is actually a correct understanding of prophecy. And we must do it in spite of the fact that some people will not like it and some people will get upset. And we have to be careful how we say things. But nevertheless, facts are facts. And so in our next episode, we're going to continue to look at Catholic influence in America and in the world in general, and see how it's growing back to power. And soon it will achieve supremacy again, and then the last day events, which are recorded in the book of Revelation, will transpire. So until then, I'll see you again. God bless, and I hope that you have been edified by watching and listening, and hopefully we will get a better understanding ultimately of the book of Revelation and the role of the Catholic Church in America in prophecy and in the world in general. Thank you for now, and I'll see you again.